Welcome to Taste of Truth Tuesdays, where we'll be serving up bite-sized conversations on all things fitness, nutrition, mindset, and spirituality. So grab your headphones and get ready to taste the truth with us every Tuesday. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform because every bite counts. Hey, welcome back to Taste of Truth Tuesdays. And I know, I said I was wrapping up the podcast at the end of last season, and technically that's still true. But I also told you that when a conversation really lights me up, when I come across someone or something that I know you need to hear, I'll be dropping in with some bonus episodes. And today is one of those days. We are getting into the truth about midlife hormones and body fat, the stuff that actually matters when your body starts changing around your late 30s into your 40s and beyond. So if you ever wondered why that old eat less, move more advice suddenly stopped working, or if you're tired of being told to fear fat without understanding its biological importance, you're going to want to stick around for this conversation. So midlife is generally defined as the ages between 37 and 65, and this isn't just a calendar phase. It is a biological, emotional, and identity-shifting chapter. For women, it often marks the beginning of perimenopause, the transitional period leading up to menopause, where the ovaries gradually produce less estrogen. Menopause itself is defined as the 12-month mark after your final menstruation period, but the hormonal fluctuations and symptoms often begin years and can last well beyond that point. To really understand what's happening in our bodies now, we have to rewind the clock. So from puberty, our bodies have been shaped by an elegant hormonal dance. Estrogen, progesterone, and to a lesser extent, testosterone govern everything from our cycle to our skin, from our energy, and to our emotional responses. These hormones rise and fall in predictable patterns until they don't. And when they don't, you feel it. Hot flashes, sleep disruptions, brain fog, mood swings, slower recovery from workouts, a scale that doesn't seem to budge no matter what you do, and the silent undercurrents from the gradual loss of bone density, also known as osteopenia, that often go unnoticed until it's too late. These are not random annoyances, they are signals. They deserve to be understood. In today's post and today's podcast episode, I'm talking with registered dietitian and research wizard Maryann Jacobsen about what actually helps us thrive during perimenopause and menopause. We get into why muscle is metabolic gold, why cardio isn't always the answer but is important, and how biofeedback like your body's own cues, hunger, energy, sleep, stress, and mood can tell you more about what's working than any calorie tracker or influencer's reel ever could. We also challenge the idea that your bathroom scale is the best measure of health. Spoiler alert, it's not. Tools like the DEXA scan provide deeper insights into your bone density and lean body mass, which two things that matter much more than weight on the scale ever could in this stage of life. So while your smart scale might be using bioelectrical impedance, which might not be as accurate, it can still give you general trends if you know how to interpret it. One part of our conversation that really hit me hard was Maryann's mention of the body fat research around fertility. Scientists have found that a minimum of 17% body fat is required just to get a menstruation cycle, and it's about 22% is needed to maintain ovulation. But here is the real shocker. In mature women, regular ovulatory cycles are often supported best at 26 to 28% body fat, and the studies are linked in the episode blog. So that means while many of us have been taught to chase ultra-lean physiques, and so typical fitspiration images are around 17% body fat or so, chronic calorie restriction or overtraining, these can actually backfire on our reproductive health, bone health, and overall vitality. In populations where food is scarce or physical demands are really high, like in ballerinas or gymnasts, we see these patterns: delayed first periods, longer gaps between birth, and earlier onset of menopause. It is the body adapting for survival. But in modern life, we sometimes impose these same conditions on ourselves in the name of fitness. I've said this in a past episode. Many women are unknowingly undereating due to a fear of eating too much, maybe past experiences with chronic dieting, or a lack of understanding their overall energy needs. A recent review of 42 studies published between 2013 and 2020 found women are more likely to be deficient in essential nutrients, with between 30 to 70% of women in those studies being energy deficient. And why does that matter? Well, your body won't prioritize reproduction when it's underfueled. Ovulation is one of the first things to go when energy is scarce. And without ovulation, you won't produce progesterone. So that chronic undereating, it's not just draining your energy, it's likely tanking your progesterone too. And while estrogen usually gets the spotlight in menopause care, often treated as the main character, it's honestly progesterone that deserves a standing ovation. Many women are told, you just need progesterone just to protect yourself from estrogen's effects, as if it's merely like a buffer. But that undersells its pure brilliance. The name progesterone literally means pro-gestation, but its impact goes far beyond fertility. Progesterone is a master regulator. It stabilizes tissues, supports metabolic balance, calms inflammation, protects against stress, and even plays a role in brain health. So while estrogen stimulates, progesterone shields. While estrogen builds, progesterone restores. And what I find fascinating is our bodies produce far more progesterone than estrogen, especially after ovulation and during pregnancy. That's not a fluke. It reflects just how critical progesterone is to our overall well-being. So, when ovulation slows or eventually disappears in midlife, it's not just your period going quiet. It is an entire downstream network of hormonal resilience, especially progesterone, that starts to fade. And that, my friends, is when symptoms ramp up. Understanding this isn't just about managing menopause, it's about honoring your biology, updating your strategies, and supporting your body like the powerful, responsive system it actually is. If we want to optimize our hormones in midlife, we have to reevaluate our goals. And this isn't about grinding harder, it's about getting smarter. And to get smarter, we got to zoom out. Ovulation isn't just some fertility footnote, it is the main event of your cycle. And I don't know about you, but I think many of us were taught that the bleed is the cycle. But nope, that's just more like the after party. The headliner, that's the ovulation. Podcast listeners, in the episode blog, I have a photo of the hormonal cycle, about the 28 days, and you can see the hormones as they go through. And so if you want to check that out, go ahead. So why does this matter in midlife? Because ovulation is the only way your body makes meaningful amounts of progesterone. And as Maryann points out in today's interview, she wishes she had known just how crucial that was earlier in life. Here's the main takeaway. Your body only ovulates consistently when it feels safe and it's well nourished. And that means you're eating enough, you're not overtraining, and you're not stuck in a cortisol-fueled chaos spiral. Ovulation is not just about fertility. It is a vital sign of overall health. Having optimal progesterone levels and ovulation are equally important, even if pregnancy isn't your goal. These two hormones that anchor your cycle, estrogen and progesterone, do so much more than just regulate your period. They influence nearly every system of your body, from bone density to brain function, insulin sensitivity to mitochondrial health. And what is so important to know, progesterone is the first hormone to quietly disappear as you enter perimenopause. So that's why your energy feels off, your sleep gets wonky, and your tolerance to stress, tanks. Your body isn't broken, it is adapting. So, let's break the rules. Let's try to rewrite the midlife playbook and finally start listening to the wisdom our bodies have been whispering all along. Without any further ado, let's begin the interview. All right, everybody. I am here with Maryann Jacobsen, and I am so grateful she took some time out of her busy schedule to sit down with us and discuss midlife fitness for women who are 40 and over, because, hello, that's me, and that's us, that my listeners I know. So would you just please introduce yourself and the best place for my listeners to find you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Megan. I'm a midlife woman myself, a little older than 40, but I'm a dietitian, and after having kids right before I turned 40, I always loved to write. So I started a website called Raise Healthy Eaters, and really delve into like developmental changes and how to feed them and raise them to have a healthy relationship with food and everything. And then as I got into my later 40s and my kids were getting older, I started thinking about my own midlife nutrition. I noticed changes in my body and I had a lot of anxiety. And I slowly kind of made the switch over to focusing on midlife. And that's where I am now. And both my kids, my oldest is graduating this year and my second is 16. So I don't know. I'm just so fascinated. I think there's a lot of work we need to do on midlife. And I have a Substack. I'm working on a book. Midlife Strong is my Substack. Most people can find me there. And the book is kind of, it's a lot. So it's taken me a lot longer than my other books. And it's really about like what to expect at midlife, like not just menopause. Menopause is important and there's a lot of talk about it, but the whole developmental stage of midlife. So that's, like if you're 40, even in your late 30s, or, you're just starting in this stage. So that's a great place to be and to learn, I think. So,
yeah, I agree. And I appreciate that. Like the sooner we can learn about the phases, it's just like puberty and being educated about the discomfort that puberty can bring about. And we'll touch on that in a little bit, because you mentioned a book that you read that talks about, the purpose of fat and why women need fat. And we'll see that in these important seasons of life or stages of life. And so before we dig into the nitty gritty and the science and lived experiences, I would love to hear you just break down some of the definitions. We got to set the, bar with the basics first. So a lot of my clients, when I was working as a personal trainer, were very focused on the scale. And you and I both know that it is one of many tools we can use, and it doesn't represent bone mass, lean muscle mass. And that's why you talk about the DEXA scan and one of your Substack articles that's linked in the show notes, guys. So will you just describe to us, what are those? What's lean body mass? What's body fat? And what's bone density? And why are these metrics giving us a much better picture than what we'll see on the scale?
So DEXA is, the gold standard they use in a lot of studies, and it tells you lean body mass, which is also fat-free mass. So it's everything besides fat. It's not just skeletal muscle, which is over 50% of it, but it's also your bone and your organs. And so when you measure it, if you see changes, it's most likely those changes are in your skeletal muscle. Because it's not, your organs may change, but it's not going to be, and then, it will tell you your percent fat, which doesn't tell you everything about your fat. And I can talk about that more, but it also estimates visceral fat, which is the fat near our organs, especially the viscera and in our stomach. But this is something you can't tell by looking at someone, because most of that is subcutaneous fat, which is outside. But that, the fat close to your organs is, linked to most of the negative effects of body fat. And then bone density is something different. They just test how dense your bones are to see if they kind of match it against a healthy 30-year-old. And that's when bone growth stops. And if you're below that, it's osteopenia, which is your weakened bones. And then osteoporosis is even more. They give you like a score. And it's really helpful to, especially if you do anything, checking the bone density. So you kind of have a baseline. Or you could see, I think one study I read, 25% of women in their 40s already had osteopenia, which is a weakening of the bones. And that's a place you can start doing, to prevent osteoporosis, because during menopause, your bone mass will most likely decrease unless you're on hormones, or doing, there's some evidence that doing, more heavy lifting can help prevent that bone loss.
Right. And that's something we will touch on a little bit later, like cardio versus resistance. And should one of them take priority when we're in perimenopause or menopause? And so we will walk down that path in a little bit. I didn't, prepare you for this one, and we could just touch on a little bit because, the GL1P or the Ozempic drugs and other names are hot to trot right now. And when we could talk about weight loss in that regard, or when people do a crash diet, that could be like one of those juice cleanses or something else, people might see weight loss. But with Ozempic, we see that that's bone density, which is very alarming. It could be muscle mass, which is also alarming.
Mm-hmm.
And because the typical demographic using these drugs are also older women as well, and we're already at risk for these things. So to put it into a real life example for folks on the DEXA scan would give you insights that maybe your smart scale might, some people have more fancier scales these days than just the basic measurement of your weight and your relationship to gravity, which is what that gives us. So I appreciate you breaking down, because when my clients do use the scale and that's all they have, I would request if they can handle it, because I've recovered from an eating disorder. And I know a lot of us have a mixed bag relationship with the scale. So this isn't advice for everybody, but if you can handle, I would say weigh yourself daily, and we take a weekly average. And that's kind of what we track for patterns, because fluctuations in your weight are normal, 3-5 pounds sometimes, depending on inflammation, water weight. And so that's why the scale can be so disruptive in our thought patterns. And DEXA scans are expensive. Sometimes gyms bring them around. They're not always available, depending if you live in a podunk town like I do, Yorktown, Virginia. I might have to drive a little bit. And I'm sure you've experienced that with your clients. It's not as available for everybody, right? Yeah. And there's another form of body fat scans called where you handheld a device or you stand on a device, and that's bioelectrical impedance, and that's not going to be as accurate as the DEXA scan, but can give you some insights, correct? Just for listeners. So, moving on, and do you want to add anything about the Ozempic stuff before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you get into midlife, the game does change because, and knowing the bone mass is important, your bone density, muscle mass, which really, if you're not exercising, it's going to slowly decrease. But if, after 50 is really when it starts to go down, especially after 60. So part of it is kind of building that bank up for as you get older, it's probably going to, even with exercise. So if you're, I think research shows that if you lose weight without doing strength and protein, and it's about a quarter of what you lose is lean body mass. So, if you have the protein and you're doing more strength training, I think you can lessen that. I think everyone's a little different. So that's really important I think one message is just don't take weight loss lightly. Like, if you're in your 40s, really, we can talk more about different strategies, but it shouldn't be something like, I'm just going to lose weight. Like, you really have to think about it. And because the health of your body is changing, and, that lean body mass that you were able to regain really pretty quickly in your 20s and 30s, you're not going to be able to do. And so.
Yes, it is a much different equation. So, people might want to incorporate all sorts of different strategies, including Ozempic, but there are risks, there are side effects, and of lots of strategies, not even incorporating drugs, but just side effects of intermittent fasting. And sometimes that doesn't work for people. So we'll talk more about at the very end what you call regulation checks, which what Taste of Truth Tuesdays listeners might know as biofeedback, same thing. So that you can make whatever advice you see on Pinterest or advice you hear in this conversation. We don't know you, and we want to just empower bio-individuality, which is how you apply any advice that you hear with checking with those regulation checks. So we'll close down the interview with some strategies and tips on that. So let's talk about the most important conversation topic that I'm so pumped to hear you break down a little bit more, of fat. And you said there's different kinds of fat, and even in the DEXA scan gave us a little more insights to, the visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat. So those are big words. Subcutaneous fat is the fat that we can pinch, right?
Yeah.
So that might make a little more sense to some of our listeners. So can you just walk us through why gaining body fat during perimenopause, during menopause might actually be protective and adaptive, which we've heard that phrase on this podcast before, is an adaptive response and maybe not something to fear?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, body fats just has such a negative connotation to it for women. But we actually gain body fat during puberty when estrogen increases. And there's a certain threshold, and I'm forgetting her name, but this researcher actually was the one who discovered that we need a certain amount of body fat to ovulate and to, be fertile. And so that's really important. I think it's 18 to 22%, depending on the individual. Like some of us may need more body fat than others. And so body fat's essential, and if you don't have enough, like when you're fertile, your body's going to be like, we're not going to ovulate, So for women, we just naturally have more body fat, based on our biology. So as we go through perimenopause, we're actually having fluctuations in our hormones before they decline. So, everyone's going to be different. Some women may, because of their symptoms, if they're not feeling good, may not be exercising. There can be a lot of different reasons. But the research shows that it's really not until late perimenopause, when estrogen levels really do decline, that women tend to put on more body fat and tend to store more in their midsection. And so the research shows that's and that's usually when you've gone 3 or more months without a period. That's something that I notice myself. And I'm not I don't really weigh myself. Like when I go to the doctor, I don't weigh myself. And it kind of just jumped like 8 or 10 pounds, which isn't like me. Usually I'm like, if I gain weight, it's a gradual. And I didn't really notice it like with my clothes, but I wear a lot of workout clothes. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'm not wearing tight clothes, but the research shows that because body fat is one way that we can make estrogen. So it makes sense. And some of the theories behind that are that our body's trying to adjust during this late perimenopause when the estrogen levels are really declining. So it's adding more body fat. And so, in every woman's different cultures, like Asian culture, they don't gain as much body fat, right. So genetically, some of us, we're going to, oh my gosh, my friend, everyone's going to be so different. And some women may not look different, but they're losing lean body mass and they're gaining body fat and don't know it. So you can be at the same weight. Everyone needs to be aware of these changes.
Right.
So yeah. And then once you hit menopause and your body's kind of like adjusted, actually body fat decreases a little bit. So not a lot, but that's some of the research. It's not totally conclusive, but and if you go on hormone therapy, that may help, but the studies are mixed. It's not like if you take hormone therapy, your body's not going to change. Right. Some women may, again, there's individual differences. But if we're healthy and we're continue to exercise and we're checking our labs and stuff, that gain in body fat does not have to, ruin our health. Like you mentioned, I went and got a DEXA and I had no idea what my percent body fat was. Like, everyone here is under 30, if you go to a gym, they can be really, and mine was 34%. And I was just like, I was shocked. I didn't really know what to, and there's really no research on what is healthy or what's not, because, we could talk about the types of fat, but it just took me a little bit to, kind of like, okay, is that something I need to change? Is that, I had to really, because I'm also like more of an intuitive eater. I don't diet. When I used to do that, I was miserable. So I'm very happy. I eat, very well because I want to. And so, yeah, it was just a little shift for me, but I couldn't find any evidence and all my labs were really healthy. So I'm like, maybe this is the body fat I need, because there's also a relationship between body fat and lean body mass. And so as we get older, having a little more body fat might allow our body to hold on to lean body mass. And so for me, I added more protein and I did a few things that I had been meaning to do. And I didn't intentionally lose weight, but my weight went back down. But my DEXA showed I lost 2 pounds of lean body mass. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to focus on strength. And I joined a weightlifting gym, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I need to do another follow-up, but I have really good bone density. So that was good. I think I just accepted, like, as long as my health is good, visceral fat was low, not all types of body fat are considered equal. if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yep.
And they're doing new research now that's showing that regular exercise promotes healthier body fat. So, they can have two women that weigh the same, but one woman is doing regular exercise, cardiovascular, resistance training, and her body fat is healthier, more blood flow, and so that's really something we don't hear a lot about, that our body fat can be healthy, and it can take 7 years for fat to replace itself. So if you're a long-term exerciser, it's going to have a beneficial effect.
Yeah. It's more just like reframing the message of what we've been taught is healthy. There's a post that I think about one of my holistic friends made where she was comparing like a fit-spiration body compared to like maybe a mid-sized fitness body, and saying that like the mid-sized fitness body might actually be more healthy for those of us who have recovered from bodybuilding days, extreme lean days. I wasn't happy. And like you mentioned, when we're dieting or tracking, I was 100% miserable. And when I got married, that's when the shift really was huge for me. I was living in Japan, wanting to experience living international and not trying to track my macros while I'm eating shabu shibu or whatever it's called in downtown Tokyo, trying to figure out my macros. Like, hello, no way. Like, this is a buzzkill. And so understanding our bodies are going to shift, kind of like mantras, preparing ourselves for that. For me, my identity was, I mentioned this before we push record, my identity was so wrapped up in that fitness body. And I'm happy to see there's more of a midlife fitness representation happening where it's, and what you said about fertility being correlated with a required amount of body fat. I have talked about that, not on a podcast yet, but a lot on Instagram in the last couple of years, because I was getting off of birth control, trying to bring back my cycle around when I was 33. So I just turned 40. So the last 7 years, I've been naturally increasing my progesterone, taking some progesterone. So you mentioned hormone replacement therapy. So some of that can involve progesterone depending on where you are. And then later on in perimenopause and menopause, that would be more like estrogen replacement therapy. I'm not expert in that. So maybe we could touch on some of that because I know some of my listeners have asked me questions about that and I haven't even researched much into it, but just accepting that our bodies are going to change, looking at some of the research that'll be linked in the show notes, understanding that not all fat is created equal. So having some body fat on our arms, around our torso might actually help us because it's a form of fuel. Our body it's like fuel partitioning. The body can save the lean body mass because you have fat for fuel, ideally. And the last thing I want to say is I had somebody on, and I will send you his Substack. It's called Farmer versus Banker. And he has a physics degree. And so that's why he can really tackle the calories in, calories out theory, because it is based on the law of thermodynamics, which does not actually apply to biology the same way because our cells don't have a calculator. It's very interesting. So he talks about it as a farmer working with the terrain, and the healthier your terrain is, the healthier. And we were talking about healthy body fat and how, and so it's exactly what you just said, this kind of new theory he's trying to spread that's not so reductionistic as, calories in, calories out, because there is some truth in movement and protein and macros. And, we can't negate all of that information, and gym bros and bodybuilders are obsessed with those sort of things. But as you age, and as we do in this podcast, we like to challenge the, dogma that exists in some of these fields. So I appreciate that you brought a lot of that up. So before we move on, you want to touch on HRT? Do you have any strong, that can be a hot take. Do you have any insights in that when you work with your clients, or because, estrogen has bad rep in some ways, good, or, is that reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's weird. At the same time that there's women that need it, that can't get it, but then there's also this, that it solves all the problems. And there is some off-label, like giving high amounts of estrogen. So like, I just think you have to really, what I personally always say and recommend, and I have it on my Substack, is go get a physical, get all your biomarkers checked. And I have a list of them, because a lot of times when we're not, like for me personally, I had a really bad iron deficiency in my 40s, had heavy periods. That's very common. And the symptoms overlap with what you would think perimenopause. So a lot of women, they might, they're hearing about this hormone therapy. They go in and they get it, but it's really like an iron deficiency, or it's, something else going on. Thyroid is very common in the 40s, like having an issue. So I really recommend starting there. And then, the first hormone to go down is progesterone. It's usually after 45 when ovulations, because you have to ovulate to produce progesterone. Ovulation starts to, you may have some cycles that are anovulatory. That means you don't have progesterone. So it can be really helpful the first to just take progesterone the second half of your cycle. I wish I would have done that a long time ago, but and so that's the best place to start. If you take estrogen and your level's already high, regular or high, like sometimes that's happening more and more. So, you just have to find a really good practitioner. It's not a panacea, but it's definitely one of the tools in the toolbox. And some women are going to probably need it more than others. So,
Right.
I wouldn't get the education from social media. I'm going to, just find a Menopause Society certified doctor, or MIDI Health, has, I'm not sure how much they've spread. They're in California, but I think they're seeing more women now. But yeah, it's definitely an important part, but we're also biologically aging. And, there's that study that came out that showed right around 44 is when there's a huge shift, and at 60 and 44 is before menopause. So the way we're feeling isn't always just about our hormones, is what.
Right. It's just the way of it. So, from what I heard there is, yes, HRT might be a tool that women need in their toolbox, and others might not necessarily need it at that right time. So similar to thyroid medicine, we have a thyroid specialist, my dear friend, Nicole Fennell, Chew Food Wisely. Got to check her out. She's the bee's knees. I love her to death. And so she talks a lot about that. She has Hashimoto's, and she teaches down at Texas University. She just started teaching. So I fangirl over how cool, because I have a degree in dietetics. I don't know if I told you that, but I would love to have learned from her, because she's so outside the box thinking. And my teachers were not. I got educated in Radford University. They were very old school in their thinking. And I just, appreciate that we're just trying to have this nuanced conversation. But so many doctors, they do work for us, and they typically will run the labs you request. So coming there with a list is one of the best things. Nicole helps me with that as well when I want to get a full thyroid panel, not just the TSH. So if you guys want to check out, do I have thyroid issues? Do I have iron issues? You want to check more than just your ferritin levels. So, I'll link some information in the show notes, guys, so you can be informed and empowered when you work with your doctors to help find out what's going to be best for you. So don't just grasp. That's what we can do with Ozempic too. It kind of has like this excitement to it, and it might work out for you, but you want to make sure that you're covering all your bases even before going on thyroid medicine. My dietitian prefers for us to work on a little bit of mineral replenishment, and just to help your body even incorporate that, extra thyroid hormones a little bit better. So appreciate all of that. And so let's shift gears into exercise, because you and I both have a passion for that. And I love that so much. Exercise is seriously, have you heard about the concepts, the hope molecules, myokines?
Yes.
Yeah. So
I know about myokines. But.
Yeah. So I had a feeling you did. And I just wanted to remind my listeners to check out that podcast if you haven't heard about it. Because if you were having a hard day, just getting a 10-minute walk in can really help boost it. And I know you know that, but it's just magical. When you start clapping your hands to whatever song you're listening to, it can really help shift the focus. So let's talk cardio versus resistance, because I know there's kind of two people in these camps, and I really appreciate, I'll link this article in the show notes, because you made a very strong case for resistance training being more impactful than cardio for symptom relief during perimenopause. So I'd love to hear why you say that from a hormonal and metabolic resilience standpoint, because I personally think strength training is very protective. You mentioned 44 and 60, these kind of being the two. We always know about loss of strength, but elderly folks also struggle with loss of power, like the ability to, stand up or down is not just strength, it's power. And so we could also get that from our resistance training. So you want to chat with us about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start off, they're both essential. Like the idea that cardio is not, I read another article, The Case for Cardio, because the whole cortisol saying, that we produce too much and through cardio, and it's just totally, there's no science behind it. I've looked at, and if you overtrain, sure. Like anyone who, like when I ran a marathon, like there's always that towards the end, I'm running all these miles and I can't sleep because probably I'm overtraining. So overtraining is an issue, and it's very rare, like the person that's doing 3 hours of HIIT or whatever, the woman, I'm sure that's out there, but that's just not most women. But I think for me, I always did some kind of strength, but it was time. And I waited till I was 50 to prioritize and make them both equal. It was always like cardio was first. And so that for me, that was, I started with boot camp and then went to weightlifting. Now I kind of do my own thing and do a class. But the research is interesting because on exercise alone, and usually exercise is just cardio when they look in studies, they might have some resistance. It's mixed on helping with menopause symptoms. And one of the reasons I think, my own theory, is that women don't always respond to aerobic training as well with that vasodilator response. And there's an important molecule called nitric oxide that helps our blood vessels dilate, and it increases blood flow and oxygen, and that helps with your exercise tolerance. Well, ironically, progesterone and estrogen help to increase nitric oxide too. And so what the studies are showing, that potentially our lean body mass, our skeletal muscle, stores nitric oxide because there's really not nitrates, which turn into nitric oxide. So it's just an interesting new area that having strength, but especially more muscle, might give you more of that to help also with cardio too. So it's kind of a like blossoming area, promising. That some of these studies show it does help, and we need to do more research. I think, they're both just important and they complement each other. And so and you still use your muscles when you do cardio.
Right.
And when you're doing strength training, it can be cardio too. So there's overlap,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I do my legs, that's So
we're all huffing and puffing whenever we train legs, for sure, because they're the majority of your body. So I appreciate that.
Arms aren't as much for me as legs, but
no way.
So I think it's promising, and we're just not doing enough research on this. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of
money in it.
Motivation
it's hard to sell stuff and just pay for it. I am such a research nerd too. The listeners know that. So I just love like this study, that study. I love your links. So you have them all ready for us to go down and look at the studies a little more specifically for us. So, I'm always an advocate. I mean, we mentioned just before we shifted into this topic about walking, which people debate if walking's cardio or not. And I think that definitely counts. I want to support all types of movement and not belittle walking. I think it's one of those basic forms of movement. If you know Katie Bowman and kind of her take on how we're just meant to move and walk in that way. And so even Dr. Stacy Sims, she's some people are in her camp, some people aren't, but she talks very much about the importance of cardio and that cortisol myth. I have seen women who have lost their period due to overtraining from these boot camps, but they are younger. They're in their, later 20s. So they're not, the mother or young mother with kids.
Probably not eating enough either too, right?
Absolutely. She was eating like 1,600 calories and doing 5 days a week. So we reversed diet her. I didn't take her away from her boot camp classes. She worked there as well. So she was teaching them and taking them. And a lot of us fitness folks, we move so much that it can be actually hard to eat as much food as we need to. And that's a big discussion we talk about. Just most female athletes are undernourished, and Dr. Stacy Sim talks about that all the time. Women train better when we're fed. And so very important. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate how much we're honest about, like, I didn't prioritize strength training as much. That's very common because it's intimidating. Some people don't know what they're doing. They're afraid they're going to hurt themselves. And so is that what kind of shifted for you as you went to a boot camp gym where you had a trainer kind of helping you walk through that? Or what was something that kind of helped you feel more comfortable?
I think I'm not... I write about this in my most recent post, but I'm not naturally strong. And I've kind of noticed that, like, you can see someone, even at the boot camp gym, there was a woman, she's older than me, and she just took off, and like the strength and like my gains are just so slow. And so the reason I left the boot camp gym was because I just I want to build strength, but I want to try the compound movements. It was different every week. So I couldn't see, I'm slowly, lifting more of this. And at the gym, they had you record this weightlifting gym, and it was just more hardcore. And so I was there a year and a half. So the atmosphere, everyone was very nice, but it was just, it wasn't the right place for me. I have my dream class, and I would love for that to just, I use the Ladder app too. I like that.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just going to the gym, they have the workouts. Kelly Matthews, Team Limitless. And,
yeah.
So yeah. And it's just accepting that, there is a genetic component that,
yes,
even by maintaining or these small gains over years is better than not doing it and losing, I've seen that in my family with, the strength loss and what that does. And it, I want to try and keep that as long as I can. Even though I'm just not one of those that lifts a lot. I have a friend she lifts a lot. And, I'm sure there's women out there that have weight trained their whole life, but maybe they need to balance it out with more cardio now, or, maybe, and I know some of them are just kind of burnt out and they just want to maintain what they have. And so we're all kind of coming from a different place, right?
Yeah.
But I do think, the statistics show 20% of women do some kind of strength. So we have a lot of work to get more women to find ways to just incorporate it. And,
yeah,
it's challenging, but
yeah, Pilates reformer, something that I've been trying. It sounds expensive, but if people like to do yoga classes, it equals out to being the same cost, about $20 per class. And that's been really helpful for me with my, pelvic floor muscles. And I am also someone that has not been traditionally strong, and it's hard as a personal trainer. Listeners, you can't see me, but I'm almost bashful and shy right now in my body language, because it's something that's kind of haunted me my whole career. But my body shape is a pear shape. So I have kind of broad shoulders, but my upper body, all my weight is in my hips and thighs. So doing pull-ups or push-ups were really difficult because my upper body was just not as strong as my lower body. And even just doing goblet squats, I could throw around some weight with my legs, but my upper body would be struggling just trying to even hold a 40-pound kettlebell. So very difficult for me to fit even deadlifting or barbell squats. Some of those movements don't really feel good to one of my hip issues. So we all have to redefine what movement looks like for us, not get discouraged and give up, which is something that I've been really struggling with myself. I don't talk enough about that publicly, but we are all coming from different experiences, whatever we were doing. Folks know for me that I worked in a functional fitness gym and then got really into bodybuilding, and I really overtrained myself for sure and created some metabolic adaptations that I'm still digging myself out of. So let's, we're coming to the hour, and I appreciate your time so much. So let's talk about protein intake, because I don't know if you saw the Vanity Fair article. That was a terrible dag. It made protein intake a political thing. They're blame MAGA for all the protein talk. And I was okay, all right, guys, let's not bring protein into this, because but maybe is it gotten too, they were in the article, because I did read the article, I'm not just talking smack. I read what they were saying. And, they had a Harvard scientist on there, and Harvard really pushes plant-based. And I have feelings on that, because I just think I don't like to limit folks. And I think that I like to be agnostic, if you know what I mean. But it definitely it seemed very biased and didn't. So what do you think? Because some people say, we don't need that much protein. I mean, the RDA is set relatively low, I would say. So, you got any hot takes on some of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're exercising, and with aging, I think most people, accept that instead of that 0.8 per kilogram of weight, really 1.2 at the least. And then if you're exercising, 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram. I'm not I really focus on protein in the morning and at lunch, and that's it. And then dinner. And Donald Layman, who's a researcher, he talks about leucine and kind of overshooting two meals. And I'm you know what? Those are 2 meals. I eat oatmeal and I would do eggs, and I can easily overshoot, because breakfast in particular, as we get older, you're found to, it's more of an anabolic time. So that's a really great time to, and not take away. I think a problem is if we're adding protein and we're taking away really nutrient rich foods. I still have my oatmeal and my nuts, and, I just either add a shake or some cottage cheese or whatever. But the protein is important, but it's just one component. The strength training is much more important. If it's not going to build strength on its own or muscle on its own. And another problem is one of the reasons we lose lean body mass is due to kind of a low grade inflammation and oxidative stress. I talk about this one health principle, and when that rises, that's one of the reasons that our muscles start to break down. So the plant foods, that have high in antioxidants, and they do help because they help lower inflammation. So a lot of this research shows big populations that the plant proteins are a little more beneficial for healthy aging than the animal proteins. I mean, that's not causative. I mean, I think, I personally believe that all foods, having plant-based and, having some animal is ideal. And that's what I do. I think you can do, you can be vegetarian also, just make sure you're supplementing. And I'm not really sure how I feel about like a carnivore or only, because you're going to be missing a lot. But I think it's one component, and there's all these other things. And I think we've made it everything, just add protein, lift, and take hormones. And that's just, that's only a few tools. There's so many more tools, and our diets, we need a healthy gut, and we need, to make sure we're meeting our micronutrient needs and all these different things that I'm not going to, we don't really know. And I've seen this on like a Facebook page on some of these like bodybuilding, and the women are coming and saying that their kidney labs are all high and their glomerular filtration rate is low, and like, because they're on this high protein. And I don't know. I think that's not good. I mean, even, I don't know. So like, are we going too extreme? I think we are, but it's not that difficult to get protein, and you can go really high, but I don't know. We don't know the long-term implications of that. So I just focus on it 2 meals, make sure it's probably 100 grams a day that I get. And that's, I don't, record it or anything. It's okay. If that works for you, I think that's fine. But
yeah. I mean, because the whole cult of fitness developed in the 70s. I have this book, The Body Project by Joan Jacobs Broomberg, and it's an intimate history of American girls. It is so fascinating about how we viewed going into our menstruation cycle, dieting, our bodies. It's just so fascinating. The coolest book. Everyone should read it if you're a woman in America in particular. And so just how, from digital screens and how much that impacts us and how we view our bodies, and also how we view food, because that's where we can have the carnivore camps, the vegan camps. And so, I also love about Dr. Stacy Sims, she's plant forward. So, make sure we're incorporating plants with our animal products. And so with Nicole, I work with her as a functional nutritionist. And yes, I have a degree in dietetics. And so it was funny. I was doing a video call with her when we were working one-on-one, and my husband was here, and he heard her say, and you're going to laugh, make sure you have 2 colors with every meal. And Patrick was like, that is such basic advice. And I laughed, and I was like, it is, but let's try it, because you try to have 2 vegetables with every meal you eat. And it is actually a lot more difficult than people realize. So it is one, and that's her push is like, we need these antioxidants, fiber, there's all sorts of wonderful things and phytonutrients that come from eating the rainbow. And we have some of our garden produce coming in. I ate like several fresh strawberries this morning. So that's my favorite. We have all this lettuce coming in. Do you have a garden going by any chance?
I don't. I do have some herbs.
That's great.
I just love summer. I love fruit, cantaloupe.
So, me too.
Tuscan melon, it's just, I love that, because the fruit's not that great in the winter. But
no, it's not.
Yeah. And it's, when you have kids, they don't always eat vegetables. So we've always had, we do a lot of fruit and
incorporate.
The diet is, it's variety. It's, nutrient dense is so important as we get older. And I find that I just crave more, nutrient dense foods.
Absolutely. It's like you feel better on them. It's like your body just, I call it yum gross. If I eat something that tasted good but feels gross afterwards, typically when I eat out. And the other thing I wanted to mention about, because when I did my bodybuilding competitions, protein's like the only thing you can eat. And I don't know if you can go back into macro land with me for a second. My macros got down to where I was eating 18 grams of fat per day and 75 grams of carbs per day, but my protein was like 165 grams. And so I've never said this, but maybe someone might know if you knew me back in these days, but I've never said on the podcast. I used to eat protein paste because by the end of the day, I would be out of carbs and fat. So I would eat this protein powder mixed with water. And it was with when I was in my MLM. So it's isogenics, and their protein shakes were good tasting at least. So it's like birthday cake flavor or some crap. And I'd literally be eating protein paste at the end of the night. And it just, it was disordered, you know, to give it, you know, a brighter context, because it was a very dark time in my life for sure. And so, you know, a lot of folks, I think what's most important, you said when we were talking about, it's as we age, you might want to go from 0.8 grams per kilogram. That's important, because a lot of folks eat per pound. And so you take your weight in pounds, divide that by 2.2, and that gives you your weight in kilograms, my friends. And that's what you times by 1.2. So that's maybe why we might be getting higher numbers than necessary if you're not taking your weight and putting it into kilograms instead of just keeping it in pounds. That's one tip, because that might be why we're overconsuming. The other thing is that I personally had some issues digesting protein, and I'm not overconsuming just recently due to just having stomach acid issues. And when we're stressed out, you know, fight or flight, not rest and digest. So there's going to be less digestive juices, less bile. And so sometimes you might want to do digestive bitters. Like you mentioned, your gut health actually might. So you might not be overconsuming on protein, but if your nitrogen's high or there's some other issues going on where you might be struggling with digesting protein, it could just be some issues like that.
Well, it could be too, you know, if you're trying to get so much protein, you're not getting enough fiber, you know, like it's definitely not, I mean, the research doesn't show a benefit. The fiber has so much more research on it. So like, you know, there's some studies on recomposition where you can gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. You may not, the scale may not change. And yeah, you can get, I think they recommend 2.5 to 3.5 grams per kilogram of protein, but like, that's a lot of protein, you know, and what are the health effects? The long term, we don't really know. Even if it gives you whatever you want in your body, like that may not be what's best health wise for your body. And I'm pretty conservative, so I'm not going to, you know, do something like that. Like when I don't know how it's going to affect the health of my body, just to look a certain way. It's not, you know, my priority. Yeah.
I wish I had that attitude when I was competing, but I had a hole in my heart, and I was seeking external validation and trying to get people to tell me that I'm worthy, and that, you know, and it was a very empty place to seek it in bodybuilding. So
when I was younger, I definitely, you know, cared more.
They say that, excuse my language, your fucking meter seems to drain as you get older. And as I turned 40, I'm hoping that is the case. I'm definitely a lot more open with my opinion, but I hope I get more accepting of my body. And that's something I'm working with my therapist too, just to be happy and grateful in my skin. I'm going to a music festival next month and just trying to find something that's comfortable. I love to hula hoop. I don't know if I told you I was a professional hula hooper. I was in a circus. No. And so with my body changes and trying to make sure I'm just not pulling on my clothes while I'm going to dance to this reggae music on the beach. Yeah. So let's talk about regulation checks. We said that's biofeedback before here on Taste of Truth Tuesday. So that is pausing our busy life to assess stress, sleep, and your movement. If you, like you said, in the very beginning of the conversation, you went to the doctor and your weight had spiked like 8 or 10 pounds or something, and that actually just recently happened to me. Normally it's gradual. That was not gradual. So if you've recently experienced this as well, what we're going to recommend is before you go get on HRT or Ozempic, or even try to change your macros around a bit, let's just assess regulation checks. So can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah. So, you know, regulation, and I think of this with kids that when they're born, they like a baby can regulate as long as you're like feeding them, not overfeeding, you know, and watching their cues. So we're kind of born with this ability to regulate our food intake. And it's very easy in our modern world for the food regulation to go off, where we either underconsume or we overconsume. And so there's all these things that affect, that you mentioned, our food regulation, a level of activity, you know, our stress, our relationship with food. You know, are we dieting? Are we restricting? Are we, you know, or are we just eating fast food or whatever? All these different things affect our sleep, right? If we're not getting enough sleep. And so for me, when I started intuitive eating in my late 20s, my weight was incredibly stable, like till I was about 35, 36, right before I got pregnant for the first time. And so as I was in my 40s, after pregnancy and everything, the 2 times, my weight was 10 pounds higher, and I just really honestly didn't care. And just, it was fine. Like, this is where it is. But I had a time where I was slowly gaining every time I go to the doctor, a pound, 2 pound, and then ended up being like 9, 10 pounds over. And I was like, again, okay, regulation. What has changed? Am I stressed? Am I sleeping? And one of the things that happened, I was able to put 2 to 2 together, was I stopped working at the hospital. I was working 2 to 3 days a week. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a hospital. You walk so much, and I never counted my steps or anything, and so I was, I'd go work out, but I'm a writer and I'm at home and I was not moving. And so I was like, wow, could that be? So I just started taking, now I do it all the time. Me and my husband, we take walk breaks. After dinner we go, we're just moving, it's not something I used to actually make fun of that when I was really young. Oh, walking doesn't count, And honestly, it just slowly went, back down to where my kind of normal weight was at that time. So that's an example of a regulation check. When I had the increase, I did say, it was during, menopause, so it was hormonal, but I was like, you know what, I want to focus on protein a little bit, because I know, and like I said, it went down, but then it went back up, so, but I still do that to this day. And it helps me see, get to the root cause. If it is a problem, sometimes it's not, it's just your hormones changing, your health is good. Okay. It's all a personal decision, what you do. But many of us, I used to, a long time ago, work in a bariatric surgery unit, and it was surprising, a lot of people had this struggle with food and were getting surgery, but they didn't really understand they're like, I just like food, and it's like, really? I mean, I didn't dig because I wasn't the psychologist, but I think getting in touch with, why you eat. And, when I was younger, I was definitely to avoid feeling. So I'd use it as a distraction. And that's another emotional. Are you doing that? Because food is, it's not a way to deal with it. It's a way to avoid feeling, right? Because when you're eating, you feel better and you avoid whatever is happening. And then the problem's still there when you're done. So yeah, I think if we think about regulation and food, and we see changes, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe we're not, like I said, we're not as active, we're just staying up late, not getting the sleep we need. We've always had a stress, some people, their stress is an issue and they need to learn how to deal with it. And so.
Yeah, that's probably the hardest one. And I don't think these are the sexiest solutions. People want to just be give me this XYZ, please. Not, oh no, I have to do a morning and bedtime routine,
mm-hmm.
And that might be someone who's listening, but it's very complex too. So that's why, we have really, I think, done a great job of staying in the nuance here, not really getting very specific on a recommendation, but yeah, understanding the difference between emotional and physical hunger cues. A lot of us, food gives you a dopamine response. So it is evolutionary in giving us a sense of satiety, a sense of, it makes sense that we go to it. In modern day, like you said, it's just so easily accessible when we, so that's as one of my mentors says, Sam Miller Science, don't know if you know him, but he says that our biology didn't get the SOS or the iOS update that our iPhone does. It doesn't know that you just want to get shredded for vacation.
Yeah.
So it just wants to survive and keep you alive and potentially reproduce, depending on where you are in your, if you're menopause, and maybe not so much. But it's really important to know that, like you said, even doing these recomposition diets where you do high protein and you lift weights, and it's typically, we call newbie gains. Typically it's only newbies to fitness who are going to get that muscle gain, fat loss response. It's really unique. It doesn't happen as often, but typically if you haven't been working out, you will see that response, which is very exciting. Newbie gains is the thing we call them as personal trainer land. And that can be very exciting, but it doesn't happen for everybody. And so I just really appreciate so much of what you were saying about oxidative stress and inflammation being a reason why we can lose lean body mass too, because stinking thinking, negative self-talk, long commutes, hating your coworkers, fighting with your spouse, noises from the neighbor. There's all these things that are stress to our bodies and to our nervous system that might not always register right off the bat.
Yeah.
You know, there's good stress, there's bad stress, like starting a new job, having a baby, planning a wedding. Like these things can also be very stressful, even if they're positive. So just, you know, bringing awareness to that. So Sam Miller Science calls it shreds, which I'm not the biggest fan of since I'm trying to get away from diet culture, but sleep, hunger, energy, recovery, digestion, and stress is the acronym of what he checks with all of his clients week after week to check where do we need to adjust. Right.
Well, one thing with midlife too, and your listeners, the same stress you were able to handle all of a sudden becomes out of control. And it's actually a good thing because, you know, you probably should have changed it earlier, but you could handle it. But midlife, the way we handle stress, we're more sensitive to it. And so a lot of times it's a great time to like, okay, I'm finally going to either get that therapy or, you know, start whatever it is that you've been able to kind of get away with up until midlife. So, and it's a great time, you know, all the studies show like you know, if you start in midlife, it's going to have great benefits. You don't have to have done it for years and years. So
it's like cue the granny.
It's a wake-up call kind of, you know?
Yeah. And do you think that's because I was going to say cue the granny hobbies, because that will maybe help do you think that's because of the progesterone dropping, since progesterone has a calming effect? Do you think that could?
I think it's everything. I think it's, you know, our nervous system, I've written about this, after 30, we increase women's sympathetic activity at a higher rate than men. And so by the time it's compounded, by the time we're in our 40s, you know, our nervous system's not the same. And then our hormones, it's like accelerate all of that. You know what I mean? So like the drop in progesterone, and then we have higher estrogen for a while at the beginning. So it's like, it's all of it, you know, and it's hard to disentangle, you know, what's the biological aging and the hormonal, but it definitely kind of comes together. And, you know, you have to kind of rearrange, and I think you're better for it, you know, even though it's not always fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So in closing down the conversation, is there anything you want to add? Because what I like about how you close down one of your articles is that you say, we are not populations, because we keep referencing studies. And I try to tell my clients, I was like, were you in the study? I wasn't in the study. So it doesn't necessarily represent, you know, it's just we're individuals. And so we need to be treated that way. And so is there anything you want to add to the listeners as we are closing down the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about, you know, it's good to learn, you know, from the studies. Thank God we have something, or else we'd know nothing. But we really have to look at our own individual circumstances, how we react to that, and, you know, kind of figure it out for ourselves and be our own advocate, best advocate with our doctors or health, you know, whoever we're seeing. But yeah, and it's even when they say, oh, there's risk and you're in that category. I mean, when you look at studies, the risk it's, you know, not all that much, you know, like don't be scared. There's always, you know, things you can do. And so yeah, like there's a lot of fear mongering out there, and I just don't think it's necessary, or there's the research to show it's even, you know, true.
It's not even valid. Right. Yeah. Well, I will link any of the articles, like you've mentioned some about the nervous system changes. I'm like, what? I didn't see that one. So I will go get that and link that in the show notes for you listeners. So make it easy, breezy, beautiful. And those are all on your Substack. And so thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
And that's all I have for you today, folks. But don't go too far. I've got some incredible bonus episodes in the works that you won't want to miss. First up, I'll be sitting down with a neuroscience researcher and writer whose Substack article, PTSD and Complex PTSD Are Not the Same Thing, is hands down one of the most clearest and validating breakdowns I've ever read on how CPTSD rewires your brain and what it actually takes to heal. So if you've ever felt stuck, misunderstood, or like your brain just won't come back online, stay tuned. We're not just talking trauma either. We're talking nervous system intelligence, identity repair, and body-based healing that gets to the root. And later, I'll be joined by Karlyn Boryasinko. I think I said that right. I'm going to ask her when I meet her. A bold, unapologetic voice in the fight against collective ideologies. She is an organizational psychologist turned independent journalist, and Karlyn has spent thousands of hours inside radical leftist groups and now runs Decode the Left, the only anti-communist platform of its kind. We're going to dive into her investigative work, how she goes undercover in her infamous spy streams, and why understanding the differences between Democrats and actual socialists matters now more than ever. So if nuance, nerve, and a whole lot of curiosity is your thing, make sure you hit the follow and subscribe button. More truth-telling conversations are just around the corner. And until next time, maintain your curiosity, embrace skepticism, and keep tuning in. Have a good week.